Welcome everyone to the Power of Data, Transforming Outcomes, Advocating for Change. I am Jan Fisher, the Executive Director of Nonprofit Westchester, and I'm so happy to be here with my colleagues and all of you. From the end of the panel is Limarie Cabrera with Westchester Children's Association. Next to her is Michele MacKenzie from Regeneron, Laura Rossi from the Westchester Community Foundation, and Meg Kaufer from STEM Alliance. We want to begin this panel first. I want to acknowledge all of you. We come to this panel not reaching out or seeking to educate you from a deficit perspective. We appreciate all the work you do and know that you're all experts in your field, and we're here to learn together. And you all bring something really important to the table. I see government partners, I see business partners, I see nonprofit partners. You all have amazing value to us and amazing expertise in coming to this session with us. So welcome. We have one overarching goal for this panel, and that's for participants to leave feeling empowered that collecting and analyzing and using data is a doable thing, effort that will advance your missions and your desired outcomes. So we're going to begin by having you talk to each other a little. Turn to your neighbor, somebody in front of you, somebody behind you, and talk for a few minutes about these questions. How are you currently using data? How would you like to use data? What are new data goals for your organization? And if you had one new research question that would support your organization's mission, what would it be? So take 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll jump into the panel. Westchester's most amazing and giving data experts, Limarie Cabrera from the Westchester Children's Association. In preparing for this, we had a lot of fun conversations about data being everywhere you see it, and sometimes you even say things that are so data-driven that you don't realize it. So I'm going to ask Lim to kick us off, and her question is, people say data is everywhere. That can be comforting or daunting. Can you give us a concrete example from everyday life that shows how simple it is to track data?
Of course I'm first, so. I want to start off this conversation by saying data often is associated with difficulty, or I'm lost, or I'm just getting lost in the numbers. But it can actually develop, you can actually develop an emotional connection to numbers as well. And I want to start off by saying, just looking at this panel is data. I started off, 30 years ago, working in the data field. And very often I was the only woman in the room. Walk into a bunch of IT experts and they would start immediately talking over me. And when I posted the social media post, it occurred to me for the first time that every single person in this panel is a woman. And I cannot tell you how moving that is, especially for those who are in the IT field. You walk into an IT conference and you talk about leadership, just like this morning's presentation, and their idea of leadership is date the boss's daughter. And when you're the only woman in a room of 500 guys, how do you react to that? So data is everywhere and data can be moving. I'm also going to give you another example as well. Sometimes data can actually be pretty simple. You think about IT systems and whatnot. 10 years ago, I volunteered for a free book celebration in White Plains. The White Plains School District is economically disadvantaged. The current rate now is about 56%. So, it was just a bunch of women together, and we're just like, let's just gather some books. And Caroline Furry, who was the founder of it, and she's amazing. And I said, why don't we, I didn't even realize it at the time, but we were actually building an infrastructure for data as we were getting this event together. So I said, okay, we have this event, it's in May, let's reach out to a bunch of politicians and see if they can attend. And so we sent out emails to politicians. We had about 4 people who responded. But because of that 4, we could go to the media and say, hey, we have 4 politicians who are going to attend this event. And so maybe it would behoove you to actually attend. And so we had News 12, we had a bunch of LOHA Journal News show up, and we were just like amazed. But the one thing that we had, I was just like, I should just bless it, was the clicker, the click counter. So we were just like, we need to count how many people are in this event. So we brought a click counter. And it was so exciting because people would come in, and it was a 3-hour event. And if my memory serves me right, about 350 people showed up in the first half hour. We had books, and they were classified by grade level. The SAT books were cleared out in 8 minutes. And so we were keeping track. We didn't realize at the time, we were keeping track of the amount of people, the number of people were coming in, the time we were taking increments every 30 minutes. We were keeping track of the books that were selling out at a quicker pace. And so when we started applying for grants for next year, we could say, hey, we had 4 politicians show up. These are all our media hits. We had 1,000 people show up to our event, and guess what? If you check our Facebook page, you'll see how it happened in real time, because every 30 minutes we were posting how many people were going through, through those gates. And we can also tell you, Caroline, she approached one of the publishers and said, hey, the SAT books, it cleared out in 8 minutes. Could you give us something? And they were like, sure. And then Caroline approached the Stop and Shop at White Plains, and she said, hey, we have 1,000 people coming to this event. Maybe you could give us some water. And they were like, sure, it's like free publicity because it's 1,000 people. And so we were developing this infrastructure. We didn't even realize it at the time. But those numbers really played a huge part in the success, and now it's going on to the 10th year. But that being said, I want to make it very clear that we gave out 12,000 books in 2 hours, which is crazy. But it's as the problems get larger, and the infrastructure gets a little more complicated. So I can say to you, yes, we gave 12,000 books in 2 hours, okay, 1,000 people came through. But I wouldn't be able to give you a racial breakdown of those people coming in. I couldn't tell you how, who was being served. I couldn't tell you, the percentage of people who were economically disadvantaged versus non-economically disadvantaged. So when you start thinking about data, you have to think about, okay, yeah, you need to start simple, but you also have to prepare and strategize for when the problems get bigger. So starting with the White Plains School District, this book fair. Okay, White Plains School District, and I'm sure New York State Education Department, they're looking at stuff like graduation rate. They're looking at stuff like dropout rate. And so I can say in Westchester County, if we're looking at racial disparity, the black high school graduation rate has jumped from 67% to 83% in the course of 10 years. And the black dropout rate has gone down from 7.9% to 3%. And the Hispanic dropout rate has come down from 7.2% to 5%. And that sounds good, but you also have to keep in mind, as you start diving through the data, you have to approach it from multiple angles. There are multiple facets to data. And so, yes, the Hispanic dropout rate dropped, and it came down from 7.2% to 5%. But 10 years ago, Hispanics represented 49% of the dropouts in Westchester County. And in 2023, they now represent 71%. Okay. Now, one could argue that 10 years ago, they represented 26% of the total public school population, and now they represent 35% of the public school population. So some of that increase in dropout proportionality may just be a reflection of the increase in the total student population. But if you compare a 2023 total student breakdown, racial breakdown, you'll see that Hispanic students represent 35% of the total student population. So it's fairly safe to say that when they represent 71% of those who are dropping out, they are disproportionately represented in the dropout population. So I've taken you through this whole journey, and I hope that, if anything, you get this. First, it can be very simple. You have to build for a data collection. You have to also be prepared to tell that story. When I go back to the White Plains School, the White Plains Free Book Fair, Facebook was the way for us to tell that story. And it was such a gold mine because we could tell the funders next year, if you want to see our stats, just go to our Facebook page and you'll see it in real time. And so be prepared to collect the data, be prepared to tell the story, and be prepared to explore the data at multiple angles. There are multiple facets. And strategize how exactly are you going to do this moving forward. So that's my takeaway there.
I think we heard also this morning from our keynote, yes. We also heard from our keynote the importance of storytelling, and I thought that was a great slide. And Lim reinforces that, and we have to and should use data to tell stories. I think that's another really salient point. Do any of the other panelists want to comment on anything Lim brought up? Then I will go to the next question, which is for Laura Rossi from the Westchester Community Foundation. Your organization maintains a data index that can help nonprofits find external data that will tell their story. What is that tool, and how should nonprofits look at leveraging external data sources as well as internal data?
Thanks, Jan. Greetings from Lauren Perkins, who was not able to be here today. And please be patient with me as I'm taking from her notes. So I will start by telling my own story, similar to Lim, which was I am the executive director of the Community Foundation. Previously was a program officer and a senior program officer. And I don't remember how many years ago it was, but I was on a panel discussion in Limarie, which at the time the community was having an internal debate about a school-based health center from Open Door coming into the schools that would serve newer populations. And there was a debate about whether there were newer populations even though most folks knew that there were. So I talked a little bit about the Community Foundation and what we do and funding nonprofits and making the community whole. And the next panelist came and she did a data analysis. She did a zip code analysis of the 2 zip codes in that school district and a child's prospects from birth to graduation. And in zip code, it looks pretty, in zip code A, it looked pretty sunny. In zip code B, not so sunny. And she did such an amazing job of using the data to kind of cut through all of the debate and conversation about reality to show what was happening in that school district. And I turned to her, Lisa Perry, and I said, how did you get that data? Where did you get those numbers that sort of told the story of what we're all about really here, which is the prospects in a child's life? And that led to the creation of our Westchester Index. And it's been a long and interesting journey, and I encourage you to get started on your data journey as well. It's just found, and I'm a philosophy major, right? So numbers were not my thing, but getting my head around using that data information, as Lim says, providing the context to it, to tell the story of our community is what the Westchester Index, why we created the Westchester Index. So it's a website, it's an indicator site that is created through a race equity lens. So everything on the index is designed to show disparities along race and ethnic lines, wherever we could, wherever there was data, from the census or the American Community Survey and lots of other sources, to show trends over time, to provide context for what those trends mean, and to encourage our community to take action to improve the quality of life of everyone living in Westchester, which is our mission. So we all work together, we hope, on our mission. So the index identifies 65 community data indicators grouped into 6 categories: children and youth, community, demographics, economic security, education, and health. We draw from different public sources, as I said, as the U.S. Census, the American Community Survey, and the New York State Department of Education. It is intentionally not duplicative of what the amazing work that Lim does, and so the site provides links to like the Alice or to the Westchester Children's Center. It's about helping folks find their way. Our site is more designed, and there are all kinds of tools so that you can overlap different types of indicators and build dashboards and design, come up with your query and explore and design what you're looking for. It's intentionally to encourage folks to understand that in Westchester County, where folks are, oh, it's so wealthy, no, you need to disaggregate the data, and you need to really disaggregate the data to the story I just told. Like in one school district, you're going to see such a broad levels of socioeconomic disparity. So that's the point, is to help folks think along disaggregated data, think along race equity. Did you want to say?
Yeah, you finish.
Okay. And then also think about, and I think we're going to get here in this panel, I'm encouraged, about thinking about your own data that you have, and then take that into your use of the Westchester Index. I think I'll stop there. Okay, thank you.
Right. No, and so Laura, you warmed the cockles of my heart because you warmed the cockles of my heart because I'm an English major, so it's just like telling the story, like split hearts. But you actually bring up a really important point. I get a lot of phone calls from a lot of nonprofit organizations asking me, okay, I need to get this data, where do I get it? Let me help you. And I point them to community snapshots, which we do, and then our data bulletin, which I believe is like included in the bag of swag in here. But geography is so important. And I don't think people realize it until they start really digging into the data. Westchester County, I always say, the averages hide the real story. Because if you look at Westchester County averages, it's like, yeah, we're great. But if you look at data like child poverty, you break it down by census tract or by block group, there are neighborhoods out there where the child poverty rate is like 60% or more. And you would never know that unless you start breaking down that data.
And I'll just, sorry, just a couple more points. On the Westchester Index, there's a mapping feature
Yeah.
that is very, very useful for those of us who like to see things visually, and that's where you can start to drill down on the sub community level to see where poverty is really concentrated. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is there is a section called data stories where we are providing some context and analysis for folks to understand in certain indicators. We're going to be updating those data stories to improve, to make them more readable and compelling. We're also about to update all of the indicators where we can, where there's fresh data, and also to add Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI demographic data, which we didn't have when we relaunched it back in May of 2022. So stay tuned for the index and let us know, or rather let Lauren Perkins know your feedback on what would be helpful to you. Thank you.
So I was going to ask the panelists what other external data sources did they use? And I'm looking to the back of the room and I see my friend and colleague Cheryl Brannan. And a couple of years ago, they did a report, and I don't want to butcher the name of it, but Cheryl, what is the name? You know what I'm talking about.
Still I Rise, the status of Black women and girls in Westchester County.
So we are data rich in this county. The Alice report from United Way is amazing. Cheryl's report is amazing. The Community Foundation, the Westchester Children's Association. Are there other data sources that people know of that they want to shout out, or that our panelists know of?
The Women's Agenda Status of Women.
Yes, all of these are on the...
Status on the Asian Americans in the county.
By the way, all of these are on the nonprofit Westchester website under resources, but anybody else out there, data for grant writing, data for other... Okay.
On the GPLH website, there's tons of resources as well. Grant Professionals of Lower Hudson, there's a page of resources.
Grant Professionals of the Lower Hudson, that's another one. And they're on our website too, under resources. And if anybody here has other sources that might not be on our website, please send them to us. But thank you all for the work you do in gathering that data. It's not easy. So I'm going to now go to Meg. Your nonprofit, STEM Alliance, is just 10 years old and has grown rapidly in just 4 years. You say that data drove your growth. Can you tell us more about how data connects to your why, how, and what?
First of all, I'm so excited to be here, and I have to say that data really thrills me. It is intimidating. I will give everyone that. But by the same token, it is very, very possible, and we want you to feel lifted that you can leave here and know whatever you're doing, you can take it to the next level. And for an organization that was founded with 3 volunteers and a $10,000 grant 10 years ago, and now is $3 million in revenue and 26 staff members, you can see that there was a growth trajectory there. But I tell people regularly that data was a part of that. And I would say also with the fantastic words of President Wooten, asking for examples of where you took those critical pivots. Well, for us in 2020, as a STEM Alliance, science, technology, engineering, and math, serving mostly children, when we examined what was going on in the pandemic and these same populations, we were serving their families already, we were the organization, guilty as charged, that like many of us, who was saying things like, oh, well, we can't reach that group with an email, so we'll send them a flyer. We'll print flyers. And even as an organization that focused on tech education, we felt no remorse about that. We thought we were so smart. Like, we have this strategy. Like, we'll text them or we'll send them flyers, instead of looking at how abjectly wrong that is. So in the pandemic, we pulled our thinking and our resources, and we immediately doubled down, and now one of our largest work streams is in digital equity, providing access to device ownership, basic skills, and free or low-cost internet. That sounds great, but the thing is there's almost no data on this in terms of impact. It's kind of something that a lot of us can sit in the room and feel intuitively good about, like, oh, that's a great thing to do. But then you're facing people who are saying, show me the return on investment. And we didn't have any of the data. And by the way, it didn't exist nationally either. very limited information on it. So at that time, funding for digital equity, still to this day, less than 1% of all philanthropic funding goes to digital equity, notwithstanding that it's an underlying super social determinant of everything that we do as nonprofits in this county. So we had a unicorn investor that said, I believe in you, and I believe this is important. I'm going to give you a big bucket of money. Here's the deal. I'm also going to give you my researcher, and you have to work with them. And I was like, have to? Great! This was like, but for them, it was a predecessor of trusting us. And for us, it was an opportunity to say, oh my gosh, the biggest learning curve for us was that we could bake researchers into our grants. It never occurred to us before. Always trying to keep overhead tight. Like, don't spend money on anything that isn't programmatic. But the idea that we could be forward and say, an element of our program is to measure our results so that we can evolve our programs, this grantor changed our life. And that is now what we do. So much so that we eventually wrote an entire grant only to build the tech platform that gathers our data. So imagine like a Salesforce or whatever for client relationship development and maintenance. We wrote a grant for that. Like, it didn't even occur to us that we could go out solely for a grant around data. Some people may still say that feels very out of reach. I'm really working on a small nonprofit right now. Universities are very strong research partners. We were developing another tool that we wanted to try. And so we still didn't have money in that bucket, so we went to a local university and got a psychology student and said, listen, can you just come put your head together for a summer and help us look at these data points in this program, tell us what you know, we'll Google what we know. So there are very, very creative solutions, but I feel like our biggest takeaways were, one, that you can write your research into your grants as a programmatic element, because it evolves your work, it keeps your work relevant. And number two, that there are creative ways to gather data that you can do within your organization or through partnerships with organizations like universities. I think the last thing that I'll say on data and how we've evolved, we've heard, you may or may not be familiar with the term, the difference between outputs and outcomes. So a little bit of what's been discussed so far is outputs, describing who we serve or how much we do, how many tech education cohorts do we lead, how many people in those cohorts come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and so forth, or the number of hours of intervention, or the number of Chromebooks. We just delivered our, I think, 3,000th Chromebook. Outputs are, how did those interventions create an impact in the life of the people that you're serving? So you're going to tier your data up. We didn't start measuring outcomes. We were barely maintaining our outputs, right? So, but you can tier up and continue to strive for those next points. And for us, really measuring the outcomes, we had to go through a real analysis of our theory of change first, but essentially really driving down on your mission, and then what actions you're going to take to achieve that, and then what outcomes you would expect, and then you measure against that. Because the one thing about data that Lim alluded to in the beginning is you can collect a lot of data, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do anything with it, or that it's particularly helpful data. And so taking a less is more approach is challenging but critical. And lastly, on the storytelling, our website, thestemalliance.org, we have under digital equity our public-facing data dashboard, and we now have an N value, number of people with impact metrics of 2,500. That's a very impressive data set. I don't know anybody, really in New York, I think, that has a data set of 2,500 on digital equity. So you can do it, and you will be increasing your numbers over time.
Thank you. So I think there's a key takeaway that we here in Nonprofit Westchester really try to keep pushing forward, and it's great to have Laura here at the table. Ask your funders for what you need, and if you make a persuasive enough case, they will fund you, at least here in Westchester. They're our partners, and I think all of you, there's a really important lesson. This is data collection, evaluation. These are also critical to our work, and it's something that you should unapologetically put into your grant proposals and ask for. I'm going to go over to Michele now and ask Michele to expand upon the outputs and the outcomes, and to talk about how we can track that, how that might need to be tracked differently, and also to give a little plug for Regeneron's Data for Good program, because I think that's something important and very generous for Regeneron to do.
So Regeneron is a pharmaceutical company located over in Terrytown, which is where I work. And it's where I had the opportunity to work with the STEM Alliance Network. We host a program every year that is called the Data for Doing Good, where you're allowed to volunteer your time to work with an organization to try to help to solve one of their data problems. And the team that gets formed aren't necessarily data scientists or people who really understand data, but we work with it every single day, all day. You know, data is everywhere, to the point that you made earlier. So we donate our time and we try to solve little pieces of the problems that are out there. So I think we have somewhere around here the sign up for that. But we can talk about that later. So you covered really well the difference between outputs and outcomes. You know, to me, when I think about data, I think about the outputs. They're the individual puzzle pieces that you're eventually going to be putting together to tell the story of your outcomes. What is the impact of the programs that you have? So it's really important to make sure that the data, there's a big data quality element to things, making sure that there is very clear structure, the data health is there, and that it's captured in a consistent way. Sometimes you don't know whether or not you're able to tell the story of that outcome until you start to get those outputs and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So that's really, in my mind, the big difference between the two of them.
I wanted to follow up, and I hope I'm not giving any of you a stumbling block, but we did discuss that many organizations have the data that they already need to analyze and to tell stories, and sometimes you just don't realize the data you have. And I certainly found that at the last organization I belonged to, where there was so much rich information that we could use to tell the story, to write grants, to communicate. But we didn't know we didn't know the data was there, and we didn't know how to tap into it. Can anybody expand on that a bit?
You go ahead, Michele, because you really helped us actually with ours, I would say.
I think part of it is making sure that as a team that you're sitting down trying to understand what is it that you want to tell? What information is it that you're seeking? Because there's inevitably going to be somebody in your organization who goes, oh, we captured that somewhere, or oh, we captured that over here, to help to be able to pull things together. But it's really aligning on what is it that what information are you trying to seek, to be able to figure out how do you extract those different data elements.
If I could add something. One thing that we do at Westchester Children's Association, as many of you know, we come out with the Data Bulletin, which is a county snapshot of children's well-being in Westchester, as well as our community snapshots, which is a breakdown of children's well-being by school district. But one thing that we struggle with is what do we put on that piece of paper? What do we put in that publication? Because there's so much data out there. And it turns, sometimes I feel like a butcher, because I am like saying, nope, we're not going to use this, nope, we're not going to do that. Every year with our staff, I make them go through the practice when we're developing our community snapshots, and I just basically say, okay, what data was in the community snapshot last year? And you're not allowed to look at it. And they have to tell me what's in there. And I say, okay, the pieces that they remember, that stays. The pieces that they forget, does it really matter? Another thing I want to bring out is the fact that a lot of the people are collecting data just for the sake of collecting data, and it can be really frustrating. It can also be incredibly invasive. But also, I find that some organizations, they collect data and they're not prepared to listen to the answers the data is telling them. And then it becomes really hard because like, what do you do with this thing? You know, the data is telling you this, but if you're not prepared to answer the issue that it's raised, then what was the point of collecting that data in the first place?
And I would add to it, one of the things, Michelle, actually, that the data project with Regeneron did for us was exactly what you said in the beginning, and anyone can do this, extra great to do it with a partner oversight, but was to ask each team, where are you collecting data, right? And even to pull back and say, well, what is data? Again, like number of programs, number of attendees, attendance rate at programs. And all of a sudden, we realized that, first of all, we were asking the questions differently across different teams. And so that was one of their first recommendations, is you kind of need to scrub this and get more consistent, because sometimes you want to tell the story of a particular stream of work, such as STEM education in the after-school space, but sometimes you want to tell the story of the STEM Alliance. And because you're collecting the data in different ways, it's going to get harder to tell that story. So that was a very successful project for us. But the other thing, too, is making mistakes with data. So where we struggled in the digital equity side, the impact was incredibly easy to track because, quite frankly, digital equity is incredibly impactful, and the adults can tell you that, right? Like, literally, I can now save money because I have a computer, because I can shop for my car. Or literally, I had a telehealth appointment that saved my life. You can get those stories, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Children, we were trying to measure the impact of our STEM enrichment. Here's what you get from children. I'm happy. I'm really happy. It's happy. It was a happy program. It's really happy. I was happy before the program. I'm still happy. And we're like, this is a disaster. We gathered the happy data. Right, we gathered the happy data for like a year. And we looked at it, and with Regeneron and other insights, and we said, this is not working. So that's when we worked with the psychology student. We're like, we'll try another strategy. And then at a conference like this, I approached this person who I knew was doing great work, and I said, here's the thing, what I really, really, really need, please listen to me, is I need a qualitative tool where I can do observational analysis of the impact of my instructors in a classroom environment in the after-school space. And he said, I understand that, Meg, I developed it. And I said, no, you're not listening. I need this. And he said, Meg, I developed that tool. I have that tool. And I said, are you kidding me? And he said, no. And so next week, my team is being trained on this calibrated tool. It's used nationally. It is literally an instrument that evaluates the quality of STEM enrichment programs in the after-school space.
Wow.
So, who knew? Well, now I know. But it is also, again, asking for what you need. I cornered this expert at a conference and said, I need this. I am not being true to our mission if I can't show that the work is actually impactful. And apparently other people felt the same way.
Share a story from the funder perspective, because we make grants to nonprofits and get annual reports, and then we do a 2-year look back, and there are snapshots in time. And my colleague Robin Moline started to look at, she runs our youth portfolio, and we were often very puzzled around how to evaluate the impact, the outcomes of the work that we were supporting. And Robin would always say, it's so squishy, it's so squishy. I'm like, we can't go to the board and say it's squishy. That's not going to fly. So we actually have hired similar evaluator that specializes in youth evaluation. And are working with a group of 5 youth-serving organizations who work with girls and young women. So it's even more tailored to what is going on post-pandemic, what's particularly happening with females, to invest in the capacity of those 5 organizations to develop data. A lot of it is not only quantitative, but qualitative. And we're really looking forward to seeing that. It's an organization called Hello Insight that also works with Heisman Trophy grantees, et cetera. So they're in that space, and I'm curious to learn, actually. So we're sort of learning alongside our grantees of what is this looking like? How is this helping? Is it helping you to pivot in some of your program design in real time based on the information which is really data in disguise, right, based on the data that you're gathering. And the other story I just want to share is last Friday morning, I was at a site visit at a food pantry. And we had an interesting moment where we wondered why the earth was shaking, and we ran to the windows to see if it was the Feeding Westchester truck. You're not supposed to run to the window during an earthquake. But we're having a conversation about data collecting. And one of the things we were talking about was, I guess it's Feeding Westchester, or Cynthia, maybe you can speak to this. You know, many pantries are thinking in terms of pounds, right? They were sharing numbers, their clients have more than doubled, you know, it's a new basement, it's an all-time high. But when they took me through it's a choice pantry, they stopped and there was a shelf of sort of ready-made, and they said, you know, more and more of our clients don't have kitchens. Remember the video we saw this morning? They said, we are thinking about that, and we're looking at that percentage of that trend. That's going to impact what we stock on these shelves. Do you know of anybody else that's doing that? And we got into a conversation about perhaps as a community foundation, looking at what different pantries are collecting. I mean, they have to collect certain things. Cynthia's nodding, she'll fill us in from Fred's Pantry. But what else might be helpful? Because a lot of pantries are collecting different data sorts. And that's just another way that we as a foundation are starting to try to get better at what we're doing. Because we feel like the index could report back out on this in a more contextual way. And again, disaggregated data, but much more like, no, the number of folks who don't even have a hot plate or might need a hot plate is actually trending up. Okay, what does that mean for the business model of pantries? So I just wanted to give a couple of examples.
Yeah, and you know, it's so funny when you're talking about pounds of food, because I was thinking, what would it be more emotionally resonant to report pounds of food or meals? And so, you know, I bring that up because, you know, I've worked in the data collection space for years, and I've worked with multiple organizations. And one thing, you know, sort of segueing here, one thing I find again and again and again is you're not only responsible for reporting the data, but also collecting the data in a clean, like you're saying, Michelle, in a clean, healthy sort of way. Because sometimes I would walk into a site, and I used to collect data for Brian White Title I, for those who know. It was a federally funded program for organizations that were providing HIV services. And I would go into a site, and usually I would hear this first. It's like, I am wasting my time. You are wasting my time because you're a bean counter. I was like, okay. And I was a New Yorker by then, so I got used to it. You're a bean counter, and I should be spending time providing services, and yet I am here counting numbers with you. And it was my responsibility, because I had to persuade them, you can use these numbers to tell a story and help run your organization. You are trying to figure, you know, there was one organization I was thinking of, and they couldn't keep track of the number of services they were providing. Like each category, they just couldn't figure it out. You know, and the person who was, entering the data, she would like feel, oh, okay, today I feel like it's acupuncture one day, and then the next day it was just like, it was harm reduction. So it was crazy. And I said to her, I said to the people in charge, I was like, what would happen when you have a client fill out the form? You have different colors for each category. Pink for acupuncture, green for harm reduction, purple for something else. And so when she sees it, it becomes very easy for her to identify what that service is. And then also, if you're having a problem with computer, just get the stacks of paper and just count them out. And so there are ways to,
So I'm going to bring it back, one second, I'm going to bring it back to, we started this, Lim started this with start simple. And I do want to tell a very brief story. When I was part of an organization that was running an after-school program, they were required by law to take attendance, and that's all they did with the attendance. Well, we researched, what does attendance in after-school programs mean? and how can you tie it to school success and bring that to a funder. So do your research and don't take any data sample for granted. So if a child attends an after-school program, 80% of the time, they can correlate that to success in school. If it's a high-quality program that ties the lessons in the program to the learning in the school, then students are shown to succeed more in middle school and high school. And so the point was they had that data right there in the organization, and they weren't using it to do anything more than comply to the state. But when we discovered what it really could be used for, it opened up a lot more avenues and a lot more ways to measure success. So I am going to go to questions, answers, comments, and Cynthia, you're chomping at the bit, so stand up and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Knox, caring for the hungry and the homeless of Peekskill. Our data person is in here somewhere, so I'm going to ask him to respond directly, because we have captured some really interesting information that goes to your point, Laura, when you were at the site visit about people not having access to kitchens and whatnot. But I want to reference also, Lynn, your point about collecting data and making it clean data, because, and it goes back to what the presenter was talking about in terms of storytelling, because if you look through the lens of pounds for food, and you look through the lens of meals, you're telling a very different story. And maybe it's important to collect the information about the pounds, but is that what we want to be using to tell our story? So that's a really interesting point. And Jeff, if you could just speak, you've got to come up to the mic because you're too soft-spoken. Really briefly about the data that you've done at Church Pantry.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So, I've been with Chocolate about 5 years, and all they had collected before was simply numbers. It was the number of people who came in, they had a database, and that's how they determined how many people came to the pantry year after year. But when the pandemic hit and we were just flooded with people, we started to do much more in-depth research with our folks. We wanted to find out their income, we wanted to find out demographic data, household size, whether, where they came from originally. So we started to do this, and we've seen a tremendous change in the demographics that we've been helping. One is 2 years ago, the average family size was about 4.5. We're now 3.5. So what we have to do is find out why that change has happened in Peekskill in particular. That's what I would like to do.
I think that we need to wrap this part up in case people have questions. So
the
any
other
other
thing
salient points?
We're in a food pantry, and then we're giving them, for example, people hand out canned goods, right? Well, only 40% of the people had a counter now. That's what the survey reveals. Same thing with kitchens. We find out only 70% of our folks can actually cook in a kitchen. So data is very important, and it helps us then determine our next steps and how better to serve the folks coming to the pantry.
I think that's really poignant. I want to ask the audience if they have any questions that we can answer. Yes.
Unlike Jeff, I do not need a microphone.
Do you want the mic?
One quick question on the outputs versus outcomes. I'm still a little foggy on that. So would attendance be an example of an output based on what you were talking about, your after-school program?
Michelle, do you want to take it? Yeah, so, that's definitely an output, right? Because you're analyzing, like, who was there, the number of times that they came in, things like that, probably some demographics. But you can then analyze that in a way that shows like, okay, we're having an outcome on the community. You're having an impact as people now know about your program. They're coming to the program, and you can see those numbers grow then over a quarter, a year, year after year. We saw that with yours. But as long as you're collecting it in a way that you can merge all that data together.
And I would add to that it is a lot like Jan's story. You can correlate that. So correlation is actually very, very, very powerful. As nonprofits, sometimes we don't have the bandwidth to do large-scale studies, right? So what you can do is you can say, A, you would love to show either an increase in attendance or steady attendance. We never dip below 85, never, right? Our golden star is 90 and we hit it most years. But then you can correlate that to data that says high attendance is, there are large-scale studies that show high attendance is correlated with these outcomes. So, such as increased enrollment in honors classes, or higher academic achievement, or fewer disciplinary issues in school, or so forth. So you, especially when we're younger, we have to ride on that. At one point, we took over a summer program that was going to be canceled. And our entire push to earn the right to run that program was based on correlation. We are going to run this program based on a quality self-assessment tool that comes out of New York State Network for Youth Success, that comes out of the After School Alliance. That's going to be our benchmark. We're going to hold ourselves to that, and we still report against that tool.
Oh, we have 2 minutes.
Yes, thank
We
you.
have 2 minutes. And
Partner with your funder. I just don't do this. I know it's only 2 minutes. To help the funder, whether it's government or private, be grounded in reality, right? So that that the outcomes are yes, there are correlations, not necessarily causations, and that over time the participants in your program will have an improved resiliency, be better engaged. But I think part of the conversation a lot of us has been having is funders who expect this, and it's like, no, but we are measuring, we are tracking, we are looking at improvement over time, and sometimes the scale that you're at is just fine. It doesn't have to be so many. You're making a deep impact with this number for the following reasons. That would be my...
Thank you.
again, be realistic and have realistic outcomes. And Kate, you were waiting.
Yeah, and I don't need a microphone either. Know your audience, not just their values, but what you're trying to present to them, but know if they're colorblind. I've given presentations, the major decision maker was colorblind. And use the font size. I've had reports I've handed to people, and they've handed them back.
Accessibility.
So very silly sometimes, but can have an impact on presenting your data.
Literally color.
I had a lot of
unconscious
money,
bias.
and we showed blue and green and red graphs with lots of important data, and 2 slides in, he said, I'm completely colorblind. I can't read those slides. Everything's gray. All the data looks the same. So we had to leave and come back.
I think that,
think about it.
And also there's a responsibility for us to ask, do you need any accessibility tools? I think also there's a responsibility to have an exchange with that type of accessibility. So one last question, and then we're going to be here, for a little bit. Transparency in your community.
Yeah, you repeat it. Yeah, I couldn't hear it.
I say, especially when we're surveying our clients, it's important to share with them what our results are, and just to share data in general with our clients and the public. Be open about it.
I agree. Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up. I thank you so much to the panelists and